The Laundering, Volume 2, Case 05, Borrowed Compassion. A province built a coercive detention regime on top of a regulatory void it never bothered to fill, then borrowed Alberta's bill name to inherit Alberta's legitimacy. Open the case.
Saskatchewan does not license private residential addiction treatment facilities. It passed an indefinite involuntary detention law for addicts anyway, under a name borrowed from a jurisdiction that does license them. This is reputation laundering written into statute.
Walk it, the bill, in one paragraph.
On the 5th of May 2026, the Government of Saskatchewan passed the Compassionate Intervention Act. The Act authorizes involuntary addiction treatment through 3 pathways. A family member can apply to a court for an assessment warrant. A police or peace officer can intervene where substance use is judged to pose serious risk. A designated medical professional can refer. Anyone subject to the order is brought first to an assessment center and, if committed, transferred to a single involuntary inpatient unit at Saskatchewan Hospital, North Battleford, a psychiatric facility. Treatment duration is open-ended. The minister has described it as 3 months to a year, evaluated case by case. There is no statutory ceiling. The Act passed before its implementing regulations were written, and the case for the Act. Some people cannot consent to their own rescue, and the state must act on their behalf. Those are the minister's words, on the record. Not everyone has the capacity to make the decision to enter treatment on their own. The argument is not, on its own terms, ridiculous. It is the substrate the argument rests on that is the case.
The salient fact is not in the Act. It is in what the Act is built upon.
Saskatchewan does not license private residential addiction treatment facilities. There is no statute analogous to Alberta's Mental Health Services Protection Act or Manitoba's Addiction Services Act. The province licenses personal care homes. It licenses approved homes for people with mental health conditions and intellectual disabilities. It does not license the facilities where people go to be treated for addiction. The Saskatchewan Health Authority monitors the contracts it signs with the providers it funds, but contractual monitoring is not a licensing regime. A private addiction facility operating in this province today can do so without inspection, without required staff qualifications, and without evidence-based programming requirements, because no provincial law imposes any of those things.
The void underneath.
The province built a coercive detention regime on top of a regulatory void it never bothered to fill. That absence is the foundation on which the Compassionate Intervention Act now sits.
The borrowed name. Saskatchewan did not invent the Compassionate Intervention Act.
Alberta did, in 2025. The Saskatchewan bill takes Alberta's title verbatim and inherits its public association with a regulated, infrastructured approach. The transfer of legitimacy happens at the level of the name. The transfer of substance does not. Alberta's involuntary regime operates inside a system in which residential addiction treatment providers must already be licensed by the province, must already meet published standards, and must already be subject to inspection and enforcement.
And how Alberta got there.
Alberta built that licensing framework deliberately after a 2007 fatality inquiry into the death of a 17-year-old at an unregulated facility recommended the province set minimum standards. The licensing regime predates the involuntary regime by years. The involuntary law could be debated on its merits because the surrounding system was already there. Saskatchewan took the title and skipped the foundation. The borrowed name does the legitimizing work the missing licensing regime cannot do.
Passed before it was built.
The Act was passed on the 5th of May, 2026. The minister responsible has stated that the regulations are not yet finalized, the tribunal panel is not yet assembled, the assessment centers are not yet established, and the health professionals, legal experts, and community members who will adjudicate involuntary commitment are still being recruited. The Act comes into force this form. The order of operations is its own statement. Pass the coercive power first, design the safeguards afterward.
The inverse of how the substrate works.
This is the inverse of how Alberta proceeded, and the inverse of how a province with functioning licensing infrastructure would need to proceed. When the substrate is already regulated, the new layer can be added with care. When the substrate is a void, the new layer is the only layer, and it has been authorized before anyone has written down what it is supposed to look like.
What the medical profession said. The Saskatchewan Medical Association
And the College of Physicians and Surgeons of Saskatchewan, the two bodies that represent and regulate physicians in this province, issued a joint statement opposing the Act as drafted. The position rests on two findings. 1. Involuntary addiction treatment is not supported by clinical evidence. 2. Detention followed by release carries documented elevated risk of fatal overdose because tolerance falls during forced abstinence, and the dose that was survivable before is not survivable after. The John Howard Society made the same point. The post-detention period mirrors the post-incarceration period in its mortality profile. The finding has been established in peer-reviewed addiction medicine literature for nearly 2 decades.
And the province's response.
The province passed the Act anyway. The minister has acknowledged that charter challenges are always possible. Those are the minister's words, the day the Act passed.
3 launderings, stacked. What is being laundered here is not one thing.
1. The name. Compassionate intervention is a phrase that does work the statute itself cannot do. It converts indefinite involuntary commitment in a psychiatric facility into an act of care. The phrase was carried over intact from a different jurisdiction where it sat on top of a different infrastructure. The legitimacy travels with the name. The infrastructure does not. 2. The comparison. Public discussion of Saskatchewan's Act has repeatedly treated it as a version of Alberta's. It is not. Alberta's coercive layer rests on a regulated substrate. Saskatchewan's rests on a void. Treating the two as comparable launders the absence of one into the presence of the other. 3. The sequencing. Pass the Act before the regulations, the tribunal, the standards, or the licensed facilities exist, and the public account becomes details still to be ironed out, rather than, we have authorized coercion in a system we have not designed. The technocratic language of implementation in progress launders what is in fact a void at the moment of authorization.
3 clean stories,
Stacked, each one covering the seam where the next begins. The shape becomes visible only when the 3 are read together.
What the case does not claim, the discipline.
It does not claim involuntary treatment is never warranted. That is a separate, contested clinical and ethical question, and the medical bodies cited above have entered it on the record in their own terms. It does not claim malice on the part of any individual minister, official, or clinician. The structural argument does not require it. A void can be built without a builder. It does not claim that the people detained under this Act will not, in some cases, be helped. Some may be. The claim is narrower and more durable. A province that has not licensed addiction facilities has authorized indefinite involuntary detention inside them, and has done so under a name borrowed from a jurisdiction that does license them.
The strongest version of this case is the version that holds without exaggeration.
The detention power is real. The licensing void is real. The borrowed name is on the cover of the bill. The sequencing, power first, design after, is on the public record in the minister's own words. The conclusion follows from the four facts, not from the analyst's view about the people the act will reach. The conclusion does not need to explain everything to be true.
The borrowing is the laundering.
The name was borrowed. The foundation was not built. The comparison was inherited. The substrate was not. The sequencing was disguised as implementation in progress. The void was the entire infrastructure at the moment of authorization. 3 borrowings, 1 architecture, and a single psychiatric unit on Treaty 6 territory, ready to receive the people who will absorb the volatility of all 3. The compassion is the cover. The void is the case.